I'm Jen Taylor Skinner, and this is the Electorette. On this episode, I have a conversation with Kat Calvin, the founder and executive director of Spread the Vote, an organization dedicated to helping Americans get the ID they need to vote and to simply function in our society. Kat Calvin joins me to discuss the ways in which the coronavirus outbreak is affecting people in vulnerable populations, like the people that Spread the Vote helps. So, without further ado, here is my conversation with Kat Calvin. Kat Calvin, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, thanks for having me.
I should say welcome back because you were one of my very first guests on the Electorette, back in 1973?
Way back when, pre-pandemic. I don't even remember those days.
It was just a couple of years ago, actually.
I'll take your word for it.
Okay. You are, in case people have forgotten, the founder and director of Spread the Vote.
I am.
Right? And your org, which helps people get the IDs that they need to live and exist in the society. And since then, you've grown by leaps and bounds. So how many people have you helped since then?
That is a good question. So we, I think, before the pandemic hit, we were just about at 5,000 IDs, which was super exciting. We're in 12 states now and have been working really hard.
Yeah, I know, because I think when we talked, and seriously, I think it was 2017, you were just, I think, in your second or third state. So that's incredible.
Yeah, it's kind of crazy how much has happened in... What has it been? 3, 4 years, 100 years? I don't even know. I don't remember life before 2017. But yeah, it's been good. I have an amazing team, and we've been able to, once we really built the program and figured out what we were doing and how to do it, and really sort of built up this whole system, and realized how impactful it was in people's lives. It really gave us the drive to grow as much as we were able to keep helping people get IDs.
Yeah. And since then, you and I have become friends. It was just a funny story. I won't go into that, but it's we ran into each other at a conference, and then we decided to ditch the conference and go have drinks, which you don't remember that, but I remember very well.
I'm one of those people always like, oh, how did you meet your friend? And I'm like, I don't know. I think they've just always been around. I never remember the meet cutes. It's really sad.
No, that's okay. But so because we're friends, we talk a lot offline, and we talk a lot about what's been happening, especially in relation to the pandemic. And you and I started talking about organizations like yours, organizations that help people who are on the margins, who've been pushed to the margins of society, how those organizations are struggling to stay open, right? Just like all the other businesses we were talking about, we talk a lot about restaurants and movie theaters and all this stuff, but nonprofit organizations are struggling to function following the pandemic. So what are you hearing about that on the ground?
A lot of panic. I think it's similar to... frankly, everybody right now, right, is sort of in full crisis mode. Because we've had to, essentially shut down large parts of the economy. I think what happens with nonprofits that people may or may not think about is that, we depend on the donations of both, foundations and very, very wealthy people who don't give when the market is down, because that's where all their money is. So I was told last week that an extremely large, very well-known foundation lost $4 billion in the last 2 weeks, and that's, even though they still have $10 billion, that's a really big deal. And so they, those donations can sort of scale down, and during economic crises and during, the depression that's probably going to follow from this. But nonprofits also really depend on, small dollar donations. We have a lot of people who give $5, $10, $20 online, or give, $10 a month or whatever. And it makes a huge impact because those all add up. But when you have a situation where people aren't working or are scared for the future or whatever, then those things really slow down. And because we're nonprofits, if our donations dry up, then there aren't really any other options. And so then you end up with, nonprofits that are shutting down, et cetera. And because of the nature of nonprofits, we can't operate with incredibly large margins, although we were lucky, and thanks to the lobbying of a lot of sort of larger nonprofits, because usually nonprofits are forgotten in things like stimulus plans. And in the first two, we were. And then this last one, they made some provisions. They're still incredibly difficult for nonprofits to be able to access, and most won't. But there's a lot of concern, because we all have missions we really care about and people we're serving that, in most cases, no one else is or is in the area or whatever, where we have sort of critical work we're doing, but we also have staff who we love and who who we don't, want to lay off, and who we want our organizations to survive. And, we're sort of in the same place as every other small business in America that really doesn't know what's going to happen next.
Yeah. So you answered one of my later questions about whether, nonprofits were taken care of in the stimulus package. And it sounds like there were some provisions. So that's good news, at least.
There was. Yeah. So the SBA, the Small Business Administration, they put aside, I think, $500 billion for something called the Paycheck Protection Plan, PPP, which essentially means that any small business or nonprofit in the country can apply for 2.5 months of payroll as a loan, but the loan will be forgiven if you don't lay off your staff through the end of June. There are some issues with that. Like, you have to do it through a bank, and some banks don't do it, and a lot of nonprofits bank with smaller banks that won't do it. And there's just much more need than there is capacity, and the SBA is not set up to give nonprofit loans. So there's a lot of questions about how this is going to work and if anyone's actually going to get this kind of funding. But they did open it up to 501c3s, which was really great.
Yeah. Another thing we've been talking about offline is the fact that, and I've talked to other women who run organizations about the fact that the presidential years are hard anyway, because a lot of people stop giving to nonprofits and they start giving to presidential candidates. And, since we're kind of in this political crisis right now, everybody is just throwing their money at presidential campaigns, right? And which is, understandable. But there are people who are hurting who need the help of organizations like yours.
Yeah, well, and, for us, it's the exact opposite. So for us, because we're mostly seen as a civic org, and I think we sort of see ourselves differently, but we're positioned as a civic org. Presidential years are good years because they're the only years that people remember that voting is a thing and that voting orgs exist. So 2019 for us and for a lot of other orgs like us was very, very, very hard because people were giving to primary candidates and whatever else, and people sort of forget that helping people vote and get IDs and all of the things that is actually really hard work that takes a long time. And so we had some friends who went out of business last year. We had really hard challenges. It was a very difficult year. And so this year was supposed to be the year that for the civic orgs that really struggled last year, that we would be able to do enough fundraising to really accomplish our missions. And so now that's sort of, both at risk, but also it's one of the reasons that I think a lot of political and civic nonprofits are more at risk than they might have been, because we're all coming off of a pretty heartbreakingly bad 2019. And so we have almost zero reserves. And so, but that's, for other orgs, I've talked to friends who run climate change nonprofits or other things. And last year might have been a little better, although it was still a struggle for a lot of folks. But now this year, they knew that it was going to be down because, donors, there's so many challenges that people just have to pay attention to what they feel is urgent at the moment, right? Because everyone can't give to everything. And I totally get that. But it does mean that we all have these sort of ebbs and flows of funding that are challenging on any day, but then they make it especially challenging in situations like this. Not that there's ever been a situation like this.
Yeah. So just going back to the focus of your org, and because another thing we started to talk about was ways in which this pandemic is affecting democracy generally in a really broad sense. And in order to do anything in this country, you actually need an ID. And one of the things that stuck with me when I talked to you a couple of years ago is that you said that without an ID in this country, you essentially don't exist, right? And so can you just give me a short rundown of some of the things that people don't realize you need an ID for under normal circumstances, like under normal non-pandemic circumstances?
Yeah, I mean, everything from you need an ID to get a job, a bank account, housing. A lot of homeless shelters require ID to let you sleep there at night. A lot of food banks require ID to allow you to get food, something that is relevant both during a pandemic and before one. You need an ID to seek medical treatment. So, I mean, really, if you just think about all the things that you pull your ID out for, it's really everything. We keep a long list because people keep, always send us things. It's like if you have want to visit a child in a hospital in a pediatric ward, even if you're family, you have to have ID, right? It's just everything. If you want water from the government in Flint, then you have to show ID. It's literally, you have to show ID for everything. And so when you don't have it, your ability to escape poverty, your ability to feed your family, your ability to have a place to sleep at night is really hindered because you don't have the ID you need to do that.
Yeah. So one of the things that your org has been affected by is the fact that I think the way that you help people get IDs, is you go into their homes, right? And it's sometimes a pretty intimate job, right? You have to go into their homes, look through boxes and birth certificates. So I imagine that has been affected by the fact that we all have to socially distance now.
Yeah. And I mean, we spend a lot of time in shelters and prisons and schools. A large percentage of the folks that we work with don't even have regular homes. So we're in community centers, we're in churches, we're in food banks, and all of those places have been closed. So yeah, our operations have been grounded for several weeks because we're fully grassroots. It's just person to person, sitting down with someone, ordering them a birth certificate, driving them to the DMV, et cetera. And now, DMVs across the country are closed. It felt strange because I was sort of making these decisions and I felt like someone from the CDC should be calling me. But I realized several weeks ago, I think I should shut down operations. I think that is the thing that makes sense. And I was talking to other friends who do this type of work, and we were like, I really feel like the government should be telling us what to do, but they're not. And considering how extremely high risk the populations we work with are. People experiencing homelessness are 30% more likely to have respiratory diseases, for instance. And so given how high risk the population is that we work with and the fact that they can't do things like self-quarantine or wash their hands regularly, and given, the fact that we have a lot of volunteers who are retired, we had to shut down. So it's now, we have our teams. Luckily, we were already fully remote. So meeting on Zoom and talking on Slack on day is not different for anyone. But we're working on a lot of sort of virtual solutions. Both now, there's still some things we're able to do. A lot of state DMVs are still, online open for renewals and different things like that. And so, but we're also using this time to do a lot of training internally, to sort of do a lot of reflection. This is the first time we've ever not been in operation. So we're able to look at, okay, well, what have we done over the last 3 years? And what if we learned and really start to, we're asking our staff to do this project of coming up with all these ideas that are really amazing because we have time to sort of sit down and think. And then one of the things we're also really trying to do is work with our partners and work on the ground to see what are ways that we can help right now, even if it's outside of the scope of our work. What are the needs of our clients and community right now? And are there ways that we can help with that while we're all grounded?
Yeah. Another thing that we talked about offline was the fact that I was complaining and you were complaining. I think a lot of people are complaining about there are a lot of things that are coming out to help people, additional resources. And of course, there's the stimulus package. But the way that they are organized and the way that they're managed, specifically the stimulus package checks, it leaves out the people who are at the margins, the very people that need this help the most. So let's just start with the stimulus checks. How is that a challenge with people who are on the margins and people who don't have an ID?
In order to get one of the stimulus checks, you either have to have filed taxes in 2018, filed 2019 taxes, or receive Social Security. But there are over 12% of the population that doesn't file taxes. And you could do that for a lot of reasons, right? If you make an income below the poverty line, which you could be working full-time minimum wage and still be making an income below the poverty line, then you don't have to file taxes, right? If you're incarcerated, you don't have to file taxes. There are a lot of people who don't have to file taxes, but because of that, they're not eligible for the stimulus check. And of course, those are the people who need the $1,200 the most. And then, we've now extended the tax filing date to July 15th, which is great. But the people who don't file taxes in the first place are less likely to have computers or internet at home. They're less likely to be aware of free tax services. There's all of these other things, so that they're less likely to know, because I haven't spoken to many experts who have realized, and I keep asking questions like, hi, do you understand that there are over 20 million people who don't file taxes and aren't eligible for these stimulus checks? And if the experts don't know, and it's not something the press is talking about, then the folks who aren't eligible don't realize that they're not getting those checks unless they file taxes, and they have to figure out how. So it is a real challenge, and something I think that is really being ignored.
Yeah. And, this is kind of a controversial thing to talk about, but, I don't think we should be naive about the fact that there are a lot of people who aren't filing taxes because they are kind of living in the margins, and, they're just taking money wherever they can get because maybe they can't get a job because they have a conviction, or, they have a record, or, they're working as babysitters or nannies, or, doing yard work. Those people aren't any less worthy of help during the pandemic. In fact, they need it more.
Yeah. Not only do they need it more for themselves, but if we are thinking about, right, all of the things we're asking people to do, like shelter in place, for a lot of us, it's great, I get to stay home and drink wine and watch Netflix and Zoom. And it's kind of, It's a little boring, but it's kind of fun. We'll all get through it together. We'll all watch TikTok, right? In order for this to end, we need everybody. I know I'm a TikTok person now. We need everybody to be able to stay at home. But stocking up at Costco is expensive. Not working is expensive. Being able to afford hand sanitizer, like all of these things are expensive. And exactly the people who aren't getting these checks are folks who are going to have to be out in society because they can't afford to just stay at home watching Netflix. And then that's going to slow down the flattening of the curve that we're all aiming for. So it's not just that those folks need, these stimulus checks because it will help them more than almost anyone, but it's that it's the best for all of us. It's like when we shut down the water for people who can't afford to pay their water bill. Yeah, that hurts them, but that also hurts society because that's the fastest way that that disease gets passed on. And so we have to think about this just as much as a societal issue in a way that we help take care of our communities and the ways we help end this pandemic, as we need to think about the fact that these folks deserve and need to have these stimulus checks as much, if not more, than anyone else.
Ready for your next adventure? KLM Royal Dutch Airlines brings you Real Deal Days, your chance to uncover real adventures and create real memories. Taste the real Amsterdam, explore the real Barcelona, and discover the real Johannesburg, along with many more destinations around the world. Secure your real deal today and seize the moment with KLM Royal Dutch Airlines. Restrictions apply. See terms and conditions at klm.com.
So one of the things that we talked about was how a lot of these services that people on the margins would use, generally like food banks and other services, they're being taxed now because the unemployment rate came out and it's like 6.6 million people have filed for unemployment. All of those services are being taxed, right? And people, who don't have IDs kind of rely on these services.
I mean, one of the other problems is that, we're now seeing lines and lines and lines of people around the block going at food banks, right? And so I think we had, 10.4 million people in the month of March who became unemployed. And that's just who filed for unemployment. We know it's much higher because a lot of people couldn't even file. And so you have, all of the people who sort of just normally go to food banks and rely on food banks in order to be able to feed their families every week. But now the numbers of people and the demands on the food banks are, 10, 20 times more. And so that means that the people, both who need it right now because they're suddenly unemployed, have less access to food, but the people who have always needed it also have suddenly less access. And meanwhile, the food banks are, so desperate for donations and desperate for help, and, also have incredibly stressed, exhausted staff who are putting themselves at risk. So it's really, it's really kind of a bad situation for everybody.
Yeah. Where did I get the 6.6 million figure from? Was that just,
that was this last Thursday. So last Thursday was 6.6. The Thursday before that was 3.3. And the Thursday before that was like 70,000. But all added up, it was about 10.4.
Wow, 10.4. It's even worse than I thought. Oh, God.
Yeah.
So one of the things that we don't talk about a lot, maybe because, it's kind of taboo right now. We're worried about saving lives. You don't even have enough ventilators, enough masks, right? But the fact that you started this org because of voter ID laws. I know you've branched out since then and people need IDs for a whole host of other things, but you started with the idea of, countering voter ID laws by actually getting people the ID they need to vote. And that is going to be hindered now, right? And I think it is the most important election of our lifetimes.
We are still figuring out what we're going to do. I literally do not have an answer about what the election's going to look like. And people keep asking me, and I'm like, I don't know. Is your crystal ball working? Because mine's not. And so, it is. There's a huge movement for vote by mail, which is fantastic, and we really, really need it. But the demographic we work with, vote by mail won't necessarily work for. And so, we don't want people to go vote in person, and we don't know what the world's going to look like in November. And we are in a space where we are really, really evaluating all possible scenarios and all possible options, and, working with and talking to a lot of other organizations. But a lot of this is, we just need to wait and see. We have to see how long this is going to go and what it's going to look like. Now, we should be in sort of the peak period of getting folks IDs and getting folks registered and talking to them about voting, et cetera. And that's all going to be cut down, so we'll have at most, 2 months before the election to do a lot of work. And then I don't know. I honestly don't know what November is going to look like. And if it's all vote by mail, then I don't know. I will pick up stacks of ballots and take them to shelters. I literally, Jen, I have zero idea. I think about this every day, and then we see crises like we have in Wisconsin right now, which by the time this airs, we'll find out what happens. But either they're going to vote tomorrow or not, and nobody's quite sure. And so, this was already the most important election of our lifetimes, given the way this pandemic is being handled and the fact that we're about to enter the Greatest Depression. It's even more critical, not just for the Iron Throne, which, fine, but also I think, we're seeing more than ever how important state governments, how important governors are, how important state legislatures are. We have both the House and the Senate. Like, there is just everything matters right now. So November is going to be more critical than I think we ever imagined, and we have zero idea what it's going to look like. And I don't know what our work's going to look like. And so what we're doing is just making sure that people are trained and ready. I'm working really hard to make sure I can keep my staff on board, and that we're recruiting volunteers, and that we're just nimble. And so whatever November looks like, we'll be ready for it.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of what I meant. Like, I know that this would be peak time for an organization like yours to get prepared for November. You'd be getting IDs, you'd be getting people, prepared, for November, and you can't do that. And so just in that one tiny small way, and it's not a small way, but in that one way, it's going to affect the outcome of November. Regardless of how we end up voting, there are going to be lots of people who would normally have the ID to vote, if that's still required, who aren't going to have ID in November. And that for one, worries me a lot. I know it worries you, but it really worries me too.
It worries me. I'm worried on many levels. Our staff and volunteers, and I have the most amazing folks, because even when I said we have to be grounded, there's a global pandemic, they were like, well, what if we do this? What if we do that? Because everyone really wants to work, and we're really concerned about what's happening with our clients right now and the communities we serve right now. And then, also thinking about what November is going to look like. And it could be one of a trillion things, and I think the thing that we have very much sort of accepted in this time, and it sort of goes back to what I said about us reaching out to partners and looking at issues. And like right now, we're working very hard on a solution to this sort of stimulus check challenge, and just saying like, look, yeah, our main mandate is to get IDs, but right now there's an emergency, and we're going to help the people who we've dedicated ourselves to helping in whatever way that we have to. And so whether that's helping them file taxes and get stimulus checks, or whether that's figuring out if we can take mail-in ballots to shelters, or whatever it is, we are trying to be sure that we are able to help in whatever way we can to get us all through this, and to get as many people voting in November as possible, regardless of what that looks like.
I want to go back to the stimulus package, for instance, because like you just mentioned, that's really one of the biggest concerns around what's happening right now, getting people the help that they need. Is there anything that the average listener can do to help? I mean, should we be calling our representatives? Should we be, what should we be doing to help right now?
Yes. So one thing is absolutely call your senators and your congresspeople. They are working on a fourth stimulus package. And the way that they've structured these are so bad that they're going to have to pass 1 million of them. Like, we should just learn from Australia, which has done incredible things, but we never do. So call them, and yet it's absolutely critical that you ask them to make sure that people who do not file taxes, people experiencing homelessness, people who are incarcerated, people who are no income or looking below the poverty line, that their needs are addressed in the next stimulus bill, because their needs were not addressed close to at all. There were some activists who lobbied really hard and got a couple of concessions, but they really need to address the needs of the most vulnerable people in this country. And so that is the first thing I'd say. For us, if you are a CPA, or you've ever done the VITA program with the IRS, the Volunteer Tax Program, then we would love to talk to you. You can email me at kat@spreadthevote.org, because we are working very hard to try to find a solution to this problem, or at least a way to help folks file their taxes and get their stimulus checks. And we've got some things we're working on and would love to talk to any of you out there. And then the other thing that I would say is, so, food banks and shelters, their staffs are working, quadruple time. They had to all volunteer activities are suspended everywhere, but they're still serving, and it's just the staff, and they're working so hard and with fewer funds and more demand. And so what most places are asking for is don't drop off goods, of course, stay home. But if you can donate anything at all to your local food bank or to your local shelter, that is going to make a big difference, because there is, just think about all of the people in your community who are newly unemployed or about to be, and they're going to be going to these food banks, and they're going to be, many of them are going to end up at shelters. And so anything that you can donate, even, $5 is a couple of meals. So please help your local food banks and shelters.
Wow, that's amazing. Well, Kat Calvin, thank you so much for joining me today. And thank you for all the work with Spread the Vote. You know how much I love Spread the Vote and the work that your org does. It's so crucial. It's so important. It's actually one of my very first organizations. Yes, tell me what we should say.
But for full disclosure, that you're on our advisory board.
Oh, yeah. But it doesn't matter. I felt this way before I was on the advisory.
And that's why you're on it. I just feel like we should be honest with your listeners. Like, it's like hashtag Insta ad, just so I know.
Well, you know what? Okay, what else do you want to be honest with them about?
Oh no, that's all. They don't even know how much ice cream I've been eating during this quarantine.
That's true. Yeah. So I am on the advisory board, but it wouldn't matter. Spread the Vote is an amazing organization, and they're really doing really, really good work that was not being done before, and they're helping thousands of people, and it's amazing. So thank you so much, Kat Calvin.
Well, thank you. We love your podcast, and thanks everyone for listening.
Thank you for listening. The Electorette is independently created and produced by me, Jen Taylor Skinner. And of course, I'm the host. But I also do all of the editing, the audio, and the graphics. You name it, it's on my plate. So if you enjoyed this episode of The Electorette, please help The Electorette grow by subscribing. Just hit the subscribe button on whatever app you use to listen to podcasts. Also leave a review for The Electorette on iTunes. Lastly, one final way to help The Electorette is by following The Electorette on social media. That's @Electorette on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Thanks again for listening, and until next time, keep up the good fight.